I welcome once again to the medical student in College of Medicine and College of Pharmacy, whom join us in this series of lectures in cardiovascular physiology of cardiovascular system. Our subject today will discuss the cardiac output, preload, afterload, and the concept of the Frank-Starling law or Frank-Starling mechanism. So the cardiac output, firstly, you have to know three things: contractility, preload, and afterload. What's meant by contractility is the contractility is the intrinsic ability of the cardiac muscle to develop force for the given muscle length. As we said previously, this intrinsic would called automaticity. Secondly, preload. What mean by preload is a muscle length prior to contractilities. Is the length of the muscle. You know the sliding actin and myosin filament, and the sarcomere is the contractile unit of the heart, is the length of sarcomere, length of the fibers prior to contractility. And it is dependent of ventricular filling. That is to say, as we said previously, in diastolic volume, which is the same as meaning of venous return. In diastolic volume value is related to the right atrial pressure. The most important determining factor of preload is a venous return. What that means by afterload? Afterload is a tension or resistance or the arterial pressure or peripheral vascular resistance against which the ventricle must contract. So the filling by the venous return, afterload, and contractility against the afterload. If the arterial pressure increase, so in resistance increase, afterload is also increase. Afterload for the left ventricle is determined by the aortic pressure, while afterload for the right ventricle is really determined by pulmonary pressure. The afterload and preload concept important. We will see it when dealing with the therapy in the hypertension, drug therapy of hypertension and drug therapy of heart failure. We find some medicine reduce preload, other afterload, and some class of drug, both of them. This will be when study the therapeutic or the treatment of the cardiovascular disease. Cardiac volume we discussed in previous lecture. Better to remind you again that stroke volume is the end diastolic volume minus end systolic volume, which is 120 minus 50, really in young adult or in adult usually 70 ml. End diastolic volume is amount of blood collected in a ventricle, as we said, venous return during diastole, usually in the healthy adult 110 and 120 in a resting condition. And systolic volume amount of the blood remaining in a ventricle after contractions or after end of the systole, usually about 50 ml. What the cardiac output? Cardiac output is a volume too of the blood pumped each minute and is expressed by the following equation. Cardiac output equals stroke volume times heart rate, where the cardiac output expressed in the liter per minute or milliliter per minute normally is the adult healthy at resting state is around 5 liters per minute. Stroke volume is the stroke volume per beat, while heart rate is a number per beat. So the unit of cardiac output is the liter or ml per minute. So cardiac output ml or liter per minute equal, by this equation, stroke volume, which is ml per beat, every cardiac cycle, every beat, and the heart rate is the numbers of the beat per minute. Average heart rate in young adult, adult 70 beat per minute. Average stroke volume around 70 to 80 ml per beat. Average cardiac output around 5,000 ml or 5 liters per minute. Cardiac output varies widely at the level of activity of body. This is in a resting state, while in activity or strenuous exercise, it might increase 3 or 4 times, as we say. There is a number of factors affecting. You know the cardiac output. To modify it by increase heart rate and increase cardiac output. Increase stroke volume, increase or increase both of them, increase cardiac output. What factor affecting the heart rate is autonomic innervation, sympathetic and parasympathetic, hormones like thyroid hormones, adrenaline, noradrenaline, fitness level and age of this really is different from the young and to the adult and healthy muscular and so on. So heart rate, while factor affecting stroke volume, heart size, fitness level, gender, the male and female different, contractility, as we say, duration of contraction in a tachycardia quite different from bradycardia, preload, venous return, and afterload resistance. All these factors affecting the stroke volume. We can modify any of them by modifying these factors. So cardiac output is that the cardiac rate by stroke volume. This is affected by parasympathetic, sympathetic, autonomic, while stroke volume, as we said, left ventricular and diastolic volume, contractility. This is what called, we will study it, Frank-Starling law. While in the sum text with cardiac index, it means cardiac output per square meter of body surface area. Cardiac output, it is the volume of the blood, as we said, pumped per minute by each ventricles, right and left. Heart rate is normally an average 70 beats per minute. Stroke volume in average, as we said, 7 to 80. So cardiac output, as we said, in the resting state, about 5.5 liters per minute. While stroke volume, as we said, is affected is the volume of blood pumped out of each ventricle per beat or contraction or systole. As the stroke volume increase, cardiac output also directly proportional. So direct proportions of stroke volume and cardiac output. Stroke volume, as we say, this depends on end-diastolic volume and contractility. What mean by ejection fraction? This is stroke volume, the blood by each, which is end-diastolic volume minus end-systolic by each beat. Left ventricular end-diastolic volume, or the venous return, stroke volume over end-diastolic volume by 100%, give the percentage. This is what called ejection fraction. What mean by is the proportion of end-diastolic volume ejected per cardiac beat. How many percent from this end-diastolic volume, which is the stroke volume, by percentage? We say is a percent. Normally 55–60% in the adult. So to increase cardiac output, increase stroke volume, or increase heart rate, or both them increase. Heart rate, as we said, is directly proportional to cardiac output. That means increase in rate, increase in cardiac output. Adult heart rate is normally, as we said, an average between 60, 70, 80 to 100 beats per minute. Heart rate is modified by, as we said, autonomic and some factors, some hormones. So example of these: change in a heart rate and increase in a parasympathetic activity via M2 receptor, cholinergic receptor in the heart will decrease the heart rate, as we said, cardio inhibitory, while an increase in sympathetic activity via beta receptor, beta 1, beta 2, adrenergic receptor, through that the heart will increase the heart rate, as we said, is the cardio acceleratory. So regulation of cardiac output without neural influence, as we said, SA node will drive heart rate by its spontaneous activity, autorhythmicity. It's different from the cardiac muscle will discharge due to the SA node by autorhythmicity. Different, as we said, from skeletal muscle, unless it is stimulated by nervous system. While what the effect of nervous system of SA node, yes, have some effect. It's a modulate, increase or decrease. So normally sympathetic and parasympathetic activity influence heart rate. Well, this is what called chronotropic effect. The chronotropic effect of sympathetic parasympathetic on SA node to modify its rate mechanism that affect heart rate, the chronotropic effect could be positive by increasing, and we will see some drug is positive inotrope effect, while negative decrease the heart rate, so negative chronotropic, positive chronotropic. This will be studied in pharmacology, what mean by positive chronotropic drugs and negative chronotropic drugs. Autonomic innervation of SA node is main controller of heart rate, while it's spontaneously discharge and generation of heart rate. Sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve fiber modify the rate of spontaneous depolarization. We will see what means. So norepinephrine and epinephrine, noradrenaline, adrenaline stimulate opening of pacemaker sodium channel. As we said, fast sodium channel, this will make it more rapid. So this is normal SA node. This is resting, not resting. This is the threshold before discharge and discharging, and there is no rest, discharging again. This is a pacemaker, SA node, natural pacemaker. While here in the yellow is that due to the norepinephrine and epinephrine stimulation opening the sodium channel, this depolarized SA node faster, increasing heart rate. We will see how increase the heart rate by sympathetic nerve effect, which is positive chronotrope. It is the cardio acceleratory. While if we stimulate acetylcholine and the anticholinergic and the parasympathetic stimulation by M2 cholinergic receptor, opening the potassium channel. This result in the potassium channel, as we remember from repolarization, outflow counter the acts of sodium influx, prevent sodium to be influx. So the slow depolarization decrease heart rate. This is by the parasympathetic stimulation. I think it's clear. Regulation of cardiac rate is the vagus nerve, as we said, is the parasympathetic. Decrease activity of the increase heart rate, increase activity, slow heart rate. So that the vagus nerve by increase activity of it, increase heart rate, while the increase activity decrease heart rate. Cardiac control centers and in the medulla of the brain coordinate activity of autonomic innervation. Sympathetic ending in atria and ventricles can stimulate increased strength of the contraction. So stroke volume, as we said, is the end diastolic volume minus end systolic volume. Is determined by three factors. As we said, preload, afterload, and contractilities. Preload gives the volume of blood that the ventricle has available to pump. venous return. Contractility is a force that muscle can create at the given length of the muscle. Afterload is the arterial pressure against which the muscle, blood pressure or resistance, the muscle contracts. These factors establish the volume pump with each cardiac beat, what is called stroke volume. So that the preload equals the end diastolic volume at the end of the diastole after rapid and slow filling. Afterload is the end systolic wall stress or tension or peripheral vascular resistance or resistance, which is called the force against which the ventricle will be contracted. So stroke volume, as we said, by three factors: end diastolic volume, preload, or sometimes total peripheral resistance, sometimes impedance to the blood flow, sometimes co-resistant to the blood flow, in arteries, contractility, strength of ventricular contraction. So what mean by Starling-Frank law of the heart, or Frank-Starling mechanism of the heart? And both of them scientists, about 100 years and more ago, they discuss or describe this law. Frank from the German, Starling from the, both of them, famous physiologists. Starling from the UK. So that Frank-Starling state the ventricular end diastolic volume or stretch, related to the strength of the stroke volume, strength of contraction. Whenever increase ventricular end diastolic volume, whenever increase strength, venous return, increase stretch, so increase force of contraction, as we said, increase stroke volume. So increased contractility caused by sympathetic nerve innervation, as we said. So state that strength of ventricular contraction varies directly with end diastolic volume. That is mean when increase end diastolic volume, increase venous return, as we said, increase preload, so increase muscle strength, stretch, and increase contractility. Or as we say, the stroke volume is the proportion or related to the contractility, so increase stroke volume. This is an intrinsic, Frank-Starling mechanism, intrinsic property of myocardium. As the end diastolic volume increase, myocardium is stretch more, and there is more actin-myosin interaction and causing a greater contraction and greater stroke volume. What do you mean by the cardiac reserve? Cardiac reserve in the healthy athletic is more and fit person. The cardiac reserve is difference between resting and maximal cardiac output. As we said, there is a great variation between them. This is due to the change on contractility, change of heart rate during strenuous exercise. So the differences between the cardiac output at maximal exercise and at rest, the number is called cardiac reserve. Cardiac output, as we said, ml per minute, heart rate by stroke volume. So this is the normal while during, this is normal, look, and remember it. Look to this, this is during resting state. And the blood flow, the total blood flow at rest, cardiac output is 5 liter or 5,000 ml per minute. While during strenuous exercise, so the cardiac output will increase due to the change of venous return, due to the muscle contraction, due to the strength of the change in heart rate by sympathetic stimulation, change in the contractilities in exercise. These lead to increase in the cardiac output to the about 3 times, even more sometimes. So the 17 or 18 ml per minute. The difference between during exercise, during rest, what called the cardiac reserve. Come again to the Frank-Starling law or mechanism. This increased venous return, it means that increase preload, the ventricular filling increase, what called increase in diastolic volume, and therefore preload as we discussed, which is the initial stretching of cardiac myocyte or sarcomere is a contractile unit prior to contraction. Myocyte stretching increase the sarcomere length. That is why less overcrowding of head of myosin and more exposed of this head to be interact with the thin filament myosin to generate more contraction, but in the certain physiological limit, within a physiological limit, not that stretching to the end and give force to the end. In a heart failure, it will be this is not applied. Stretch more and contraction less due to the exceeding physiological and limit of that sarcomere length, which is causes, this is when the increased diastolic volume, increase the preload, sarcomere length, increase in a force of generation and enable the heart to eject additional venous return, increasing the stroke volume. As we said, increase contractility, increase the stroke volume. This phenomenon can be described as a mechanical terms by length-tension relationship or force-velocity relationship, which is the Frank-Starling mechanism or law for the cardiac muscle. Increasing preload, increasing venous return, increasing active tension developed by sarcomere in the muscle fibers, and increase the velocity of fiber shortening by exposing actin and myosin head and the contraction, so that they're given an afterload and inotrope state. So the Starling law of the heart, this states since more than 100 years ago that the ability of the heart to change its force of contraction and therefore stroke volume in response to change in a venous return, what called the preload, and is called the Frank-Starling mechanism or Frank-Starling's law. So the Frank-Starling principle is based on length tension relation with the ventricle. When increase the length, increase the tension. When increase the volume, increase the contraction, and increase the stroke volume, and increase the cardiac output. If the ventricle in diastolic volume, what called the preload, is increased, it follows that ventricle fiber length, it is also increased. Sarcomere increase. As we know, Z zone, it will be more distance between these zones, resulting in an increased tension of the muscles. Cardiac output is directly related to the venous return. The most important determining factor, as we said, is the preload. So the contractions and therefore stroke volume in response to change in a venous return is called Frank-Starling mechanism or Frank-Starling law. I think this is enough for this lecture. See you soon in the next lecture.